Picture this: a lanky new kid clutching his brown bag lunch, minding his own business in Lincoln Ridge High's sunny courtyard, when 3 football players decide his meal looks perfect for their cleats. What they didn't know was that Jake Martinez had spent years learning to fight in underground Denver gyms, trained by a father whose military secrets died with him. In 30 seconds, those bullies went from laughing predators to unconscious heaps on the concrete, and the entire school discovered that sometimes the quiet ones carry the deadliest storms. This is a story of calculated vengeance, hidden warriors, and a legacy that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about power. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain air of Millbrook, Colorado carried the scent of pine and possibility as another school year began at Lincoln Ridge High School. Unlike the sprawling concrete campuses of major cities, Lincoln Ridge felt more like an oversized cabin, its red brick walls nestled against the backdrop of snow-capped peaks that reminded everyone daily of nature's overwhelming presence. School's courtyard buzzed with the controlled energy of teenage hierarchy, where letterman jackets commanded respect and social media followers determined worth. Jake Martinez stepped through the main entrance on his first Tuesday, carrying nothing but a weathered backpack and the weight of recent grief. At 17, he possessed the kind of lean build that suggested either athletic potential or easy prey, depending on who was looking. His dark hair fell across brown eyes that had seen too much for someone his age, and his clothes, while clean, bore the unmistakable marks of thrift store pragmatism. To the established students of Lincoln Ridge, Jake represented something they instinctively recognized and rejected: uncertainty in their carefully ordered world. The move from Denver hadn't been Jake's choice. His mother, Maria Martinez, had accepted a nursing position at Millbrook General Hospital, partly for the pay increase, but mostly to escape the memories that haunted every corner of their old neighborhood. 6 months earlier, Jake's father, Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez, had died in what the military called a training accident. The official reports spoke of equipment failure during a routine exercise, but Jake had overheard enough late-night phone calls between his parents to know his father's work involved more than standard military operations. Carlos had been Jake's anchor, the steady presence who'd taught him that true strength came not from size or aggression, but from discipline and timing. Every weekend since Jake turned 12, father and son had made the trek to Riverside Community Boxing Gym, a cramped space above a pawn shop where Carlos had first learned to channel his own teenage anger into something productive. Under the watchful eye of Roberto Rivera, a former Golden Gloves champion whose scarred hands told stories of both victory and defeat, Jake had developed skills that went far beyond typical teenage scuffles. But Carlos had taught his son something equally important: when to hide those skills. The military had shown him worlds where violence was currency and survival meant never revealing your full hand until absolutely necessary. Smart fighters, he'd told Jake during one of their final training sessions, are invisible until they need to be seen. The moment people know what you can do, you become a target for those who want to test themselves against you. Now navigating the halls of Lincoln Ridge without his father's guidance, Jake embodied that invisibility. He moved through his morning classes like smoke, answering questions when called upon but offering nothing extra, sitting in back corners where he could observe without drawing attention. His teachers saw polite new students still adjusting to small-town life. His classmates saw exactly what Jake wanted them to see: nothing worth noticing. The school's social ecosystem revealed itself quickly to Jake's trained eye. Tyler Brooks commanded the apex, a senior whose 6-foot frame and quarterback status made him Lincoln Ridge royalty. His blonde hair and blue eyes could have come from a recruiting poster, and his easy smile masked the calculating intelligence of someone accustomed to getting his way through charm first, intimidation second. Tyler's inner circle consisted of Connor Walsh, a linebacker whose loyalty was absolute and whose temper was legendary, and Dylan Reed, a wide receiver whose quick wit made him the perfect deliverer of cutting remarks that could destroy reputations with surgical precision. The trio ruled through a combination of athletic achievement, family wealth, and carefully cultivated popularity that made them seemingly untouchable. Tyler's father owned the largest construction company in Millbrook. Connor's family ran the most successful restaurant, and Dylan's mother served as the town's mayor. They moved through Lincoln Ridge's halls with the confidence of young men who'd never faced real consequences, their influence extending from the administrative offices to the parking lot where their expensive trucks served as monuments to their privilege. Jake recognized the dynamic immediately. He'd seen similar hierarchies in Denver, though they'd been based more on neighborhood reputation than family money. The principles remained the same. Establish dominance early, maintain it through displays of power, and crush anything that threatened the established order. As the new kid, Jake represented a variable that needed to be assessed and either absorbed or eliminated. He chose to make himself forgettable, speaking only when spoken to, avoiding eye contact that might be interpreted as challenge, and finding quiet corners where he could eat his lunch in peace. The strategy had worked for exactly 1 week, long enough for Jake to map the school's social geography and identify the safest routes between classes. Tuesday's lunch period found Jake in what he'd determined was the most neutral territory. A concrete table in the courtyard's northeast corner, partially shaded by an old oak tree that had somehow survived the school's construction decades earlier. The spot offered multiple exit routes and clear sight lines, habits ingrained by years of his father's subtle lessons about situational awareness. Jake unwrapped his simple lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple that represented both his family's modest circumstances and his mother's determination to maintain normalcy in their disrupted lives. The peaceful moment shattered when Tyler's shadow fell across his table. Tyler Brooks possessed the kind of natural charisma that made teachers remember his name and underclassmen step aside in hallways. Standing beside Jake's table with Connor and Dylan flanking him like trained guard dogs, he embodied everything Lincoln Ridge valued: athletic success, family connections, and the unshakable confidence that came from never having to question his place in the world. His letterman jacket hung perfectly across broad shoulders, each patch and pin telling the story of a young man destined for local legend status. "Well, well," Tyler said, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone accustomed to having every word treated as important. "The mystery man finally surfaces. We've been wondering about you, Martinez." He pronounced the name with exaggerated care, as if sampling something foreign and potentially distasteful. "Heard you transferred from some rough school in Denver. That must have been quite the adjustment, coming from the big bad city to our little mountain paradise." Jake continued chewing his sandwich without looking up. Every instinct his father had taught him screaming to remain invisible, he'd seen this dance before in Denver, though the players had different faces and the stakes had involved more than social embarrassment. The smart move was to show deference, maybe mumble something about being grateful for the opportunity to attend such a nice school, and hope they'd grow bored with easy prey. Connor shifted his weight, the movement deliberate and practiced. At 6'2" and 220 pounds, he'd built his reputation on the football field through controlled violence that earned scholarships and college scout attention. Off the field, that same capacity for physical dominance translated into an unspoken threat that rarely needed to be voiced. His presence beside Tyler wasn't coincidental. It was calculated intimidation refined through years of successful application. "My dad knows the principal," Connor added, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate from his chest. "Says your mom works at the hospital now. Night shifts, right?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Must be tough, single mother trying to make ends meet in a new town. Medical bills from Denver must have been expensive. The comment landed with surgical precision. Jake's father's death had indeed generated crushing medical expenses that insurance had only partially covered, and the family's financial struggles weren't exactly secret in a town small enough for everyone to know everyone else's business. Connor's casual mention of these details served multiple purposes: demonstrating their information network, establishing their family connections to positions of authority, and probing for emotional reactions that might reveal weakness. Dylan, the most strategically minded of the trio, circled to Jake's left side while appearing to examine the oak tree's branches with exaggerated interest. His positioning wasn't random. It eliminated Jake's cleanest exit route while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. Dylan's strength lay not in physical intimidation but in psychological warfare, the ability to identify insecurities and exploit them with comments that seemed almost friendly until their true purpose became clear. "You know what's interesting about new kids?" Dylan mused, his tone conversational and almost philosophical. "They either adapt to how things work around here, or they stick out like tumors that need to be removed. The smart ones figure out where they belong pretty quickly. The stubborn ones..." He let the sentence hang, allowing imagination to fill in the consequences. Jake took another bite of his sandwich, his movements deliberately calm despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. His father's voice echoed in his memory, lessons delivered during their drives home from the boxing gym about reading situations and controlling responses. Violence was always an option, but it should never be the first option for someone truly skilled. The greatest fighters won battles before they began by choosing when and where to engage. The courtyard around them had begun to empty as other students finished their lunches and drifted toward afternoon classes. The timing wasn't coincidental. Tyler's crew had waited until they could minimize witnesses while maximizing their psychological advantage. The few remaining students cast nervous glances in their direction but kept their distance, unwilling to risk becoming collateral damage in whatever was unfolding. "Here's the thing about Lincoln Ridge," Tyler continued, settling onto the bench across from Jake with the casual authority of someone claiming territory. "We've got a good thing going here. Nice balance, everyone knows their place, no unnecessary drama. When that balance gets disrupted by someone who doesn't understand local customs, well, sometimes we need to provide education." Jake finally looked up, his brown eyes meeting Tyler's blue ones with steady calm that seemed to surprise the quarterback. Most students either looked away quickly or tried to match Tyler's intensity with their own bravado. Jake's expression held neither submission nor challenge. It was the look of someone taking careful measurements, cataloging details for future reference. "I'm not looking for trouble," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd grown up in Denver's diverse neighborhoods. "Just trying to finish my lunch and get to biology class on time." Connor laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. "Biology class? That's cute. You know what kind of biology lesson might be more useful? Understanding the ecosystem around here. Learning which animals are predators and which ones are prey." Dylan produced his phone with practiced smoothness, the device appearing in his hand as if by magic. Social media had become their generation's most powerful weapon, capable of destroying reputations and isolating targets with viral efficiency. A few carefully edited videos, some strategic hashtags, and even the strongest personality could find themselves completely alone in a matter of hours. "Maybe we should document this educational moment," Dylan suggested, angling the camera to capture Jake's face. New kid's first lesson in Lincoln Ridge social dynamics. This could go viral. Mountain school teaches city boy reality. I bet that would get some serious engagement. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only visible sign that Dylan's threat had found its mark. His father had warned him about the power of recorded evidence, How modern battles were often won or lost, not in the moment of conflict, but in how those moments were presented to the world afterward. A carefully edited video could make a victim look like an aggressor, transform self-defense into assault, and turn justified responses into criminal behavior. The three seniors sensed the shift in Jake's demeanor, recognizing the telltale signs of someone approaching a breaking point. They'd perfected this dance over years of practice, knowing exactly how much pressure to apply before backing off, leaving their target humiliated, but not quite desperate enough to do something stupid. The goal wasn't to create genuine enemies. It was to establish dominance while maintaining plausible deniability. Tyler stood slowly, his movement deliberate and theatrical. He walked around the table to where Jake sat, positioning himself directly behind the new student's shoulder. The proximity was calculated invasion of personal space, designed to trigger fight-or-flight responses while making any physical reaction appear unprovoked to potential observers. "Here's what's going to happen," Tyler said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You're going to finish your little lunch, clean up your mess, and walk away. Tomorrow, you're going to find somewhere else to sit, somewhere more appropriate for someone of your social status. And if you're really smart, you'll start thinking about how you can contribute to the Lincoln Ridge community in ways that might earn you a place in our good graces." Jake's hand slowly moved toward his brown paper bag, and for a moment, Tyler thought the new kid was going to comply, maybe even throw away his remaining food as a gesture of submission. Instead, Jake carefully wrapped the second half of his sandwich, placed it back in the bag, and set it gently on the table beside his untouched apple. Then Tyler made his mistake. Whether from overconfidence, impatience, or simple miscalculation, he raised his foot and brought it down hard on Jake's lunch bag, crushing the sandwich inside and sending apple pieces scattering across the concrete. The sound of Jake's lunch being destroyed echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. Apple pieces scattered in different directions, juice spreading across the concrete in sticky trails, while the flattened sandwich bag leaked peanut butter through its torn paper. The act wasn't just destruction of property. It was a declaration of absolute dominance, a public humiliation designed to establish exactly where Jake Martinez stood in Lincoln Ridge's carefully maintained hierarchy. Time seemed to stretch as Jake stared at the wreckage of his simple meal. In that moment, memories flooded back with crystalline clarity. His mother carefully preparing that sandwich at 5:30 in the morning, before her hospital shift, using the last of their good peanut butter and apologizing that she couldn't afford the name-brand jelly he'd grown up eating. The apple had been part of a bag she'd bought on sale, each piece representing a small luxury in their newly constrained budget. But deeper than the immediate loss was the symbolic weight of Tyler's action. Jake's father had taught him that respect was earned through consistency and character, not demanded through fear and intimidation. Carlos Martinez had been a man who'd fought real battles against genuine enemies, who'd carried classified secrets and made life-or-death decisions in foreign countries most Americans couldn't locate on a map. He'd also been someone who'd never raised his voice to a waitress or cut in line at the grocery store, understanding that true strength was measured in restraint rather than displays of power. Connor's laughter cut through Jake's contemplation. "Like breaking glass." "Oops," the linebacker said with mock concern, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Guess Butterfingers runs in families. First your dad drops the ball on whatever got him killed. Now you can't even hold on to a sandwich." The words hit Jake like physical blows, each syllable designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. Connor had done his research, digging into the Martinez family history with the thoroughness of someone who understood that information was the most effective weapon against psychological targets. The reference to his father's death crossed every line Jake had drawn around acceptable behavior, transforming what had been schoolyard bullying into something far more personal and unforgivable. Dylan continued recording, his phone capturing Every detail of Jake's reaction with the practiced eye of someone who understood how to create compelling content. The video would tell whatever story Dylan chose to construct during editing, with strategic cuts and carefully selected angles that could make Jake appear as either victim or aggressor, depending on what served their purposes best. Social media had become the modern equivalent of medieval public stocks, capable of destroying lives through collective ridicule and viral shame. "This is quality content right here," Dylan narrated for his phone's microphone, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone describing a sporting event. "New kid learns about Lincoln Ridge hospitality. I'm thinking this needs some epic background music, maybe some slow motion effects when Tyler's foot connects. This could hit 1 million views by tonight." Tyler stepped back to admire his handiwork, his expression mixing satisfaction with calculation. He'd orchestrated countless similar moments over his high school career, each one reinforcing his position at the apex of Lincoln Ridge's social pyramid. The methodology was refined through repetition. Identify potential threats to established order, isolate them from potential allies, apply measured pressure until compliance was achieved, then maintain that dynamic through occasional reminders of consequences for disobedience. "Clean it up," Tyler ordered, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "Every piece. Then maybe we'll discuss whether you've learned enough to avoid future educational experiences." Jake remained motionless for several heartbeats, his breathing steady despite the rage building in his chest like pressure in a boiler. His father's training had taught him to recognize these moments, the crucial seconds when decision trees branched toward either de-escalation or irreversible conflict. Every choice carried consequences that rippled outward like stones thrown into still water, affecting not just the immediate participants, but everyone connected to them. The smart play was obvious: kneel down, clean up the mess, absorb the humiliation, and walk away. Jake could endure whatever social consequences followed, focus on his studies, graduate quietly, and escape to college where none of this would matter. His mother was already struggling with night shifts and bills. The last thing she needed was her son creating problems that might jeopardize their fresh start in Millbrook. But as Jake's eyes tracked across the scattered remains of his lunch, another voice began competing with pragmatic caution. It was his father's voice, but not the gentle teacher who'd emphasized restraint and discipline. This was the soldier who'd earned a chest full of medals in places where hesitation meant death. The man who'd taught Jake that some lines, once crossed, demanded immediate and decisive response. Roberto Rivera's lessons from the boxing gym added their own weight to Jake's internal debate. The old trainer had seen thousands of young fighters over his career, teaching them that technique meant nothing without the willingness to apply it when circumstances demanded action. "A boxer who won't fight when fighting becomes necessary," Roberto had told Jake during one memorable training session, "isn't a boxer at all. He's just someone who knows how to hit a bag." Jake's hands slowly formed fists at his sides, muscle memory from countless hours of training asserting itself despite his conscious mind still weighing options. His stance subtly shifted, weight moving to the balls of his feet in a way that would appear casual to untrained observers, but actually optimized his balance for explosive movement. Years of his father's instruction had made these adjustments automatic, physiological responses that activated whenever his brain identified potential combat situations. Connor noticed the change first, his own athletic background providing enough understanding of body language to recognize when someone was transitioning from defensive to offensive posturing. "Look at this," he said, nudging Dylan's shoulder while maintaining his focus on Jake. "I think our new friend might have some fight in him after all. This could get interesting." Tyler's confidence never wavered, built on years of successfully intimidating smaller opponents through superior size, social position, and numerical advantage. He'd never encountered genuine resistance to his authority at Lincoln Ridge, never faced someone with training that went beyond weekend wrestling, matches, or playground scuffles. His understanding of violence was entirely theoretical, based on action movies and video games rather than the harsh realities of actual combat. "You really want to do this?" Tyler asked, stepping closer until he was within arm's reach of Jake's. Position: 3 against 1, in front of cameras, with half the school watching from the windows. Even if you somehow managed to throw a lucky punch, you'd be expelled before dinner. Your mother would lose her job, you'd have criminal charges, and your whole family would be run out of town before Christmas. The threat was comprehensive and entirely credible. Tyler's family connections could absolutely orchestrate the consequences he'd outlined, turning any act of defiance into life-destroying retaliation that would extend far beyond Jake himself. Millbrook was small enough that social and economic pressure could make existence impossible for anyone who crossed the wrong people, and Tyler represented exactly those kinds of people. Jake understood all of this with perfect clarity. He also understood that some moments defined not just immediate outcomes, but fundamental questions of character and identity. His father had died carrying secrets Jake might never fully understand, but he'd also lived as someone who stood up when standing up was required, regardless of personal cost. The question wasn't whether Jake could endure the humiliation of backing down. It was whether he could live with himself afterward. The courtyard had grown completely silent, except for the sound of wind through the oak tree's branches. Even the distant noise from inside the school seemed muted, as if the entire building was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Jake's decision, when it came, arrived with the suddenness of lightning striking, transforming accumulated tension into kinetic energy that would reshape everything that followed. He stood up slowly, his movement fluid and controlled in a way that spoke of countless hours of training. His brown eyes met Tyler's blue ones with an intensity that seemed to burn through the quarterback's practiced confidence like acid through paper. When Jake finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet certainty that made Connor unconsciously take a half step backward. "My father taught me that respect isn't something you take," Jake said, his words cutting through the silence with surgical precision. "It's something you earn. And he also taught me that there are some things worth fighting for, no matter what it costs." Tyler's smirk faltered for the first time since approaching Jake's table. Something in the new kid's voice carried an edge that didn't match his previously submissive demeanor, a steel undertone that suggested Jake Martinez might not be the easy target they'd assumed. Connor sensed the shift too, his linebacker instincts recognizing the subtle change in atmospheric pressure that preceded genuine violence. "Big words from someone about to eat concrete," Tyler said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. He glanced toward Dylan, seeking reassurance that the camera was still recording what should have been Jake's final moments of defiance before inevitable submission. The video would become legend at Lincoln Ridge, shared endlessly as proof of what happened to outsiders who failed to understand local customs. Jake took a single step forward, closing the distance between himself and Tyler to mere inches. At this range, the size difference became apparent. Tyler stood nearly 4 inches taller and outweighed Jake by at least 30 pounds. To any observer, the physical mismatch made the outcome seem inevitable. What they couldn't see was the transformation occurring beneath Jake's calm exterior, years of training activating like a computer program coming online. His father's lessons echoed in his mind with startling clarity. Carlos Martinez had taught Jake that successful fighters never telegraphed their intentions, never gave opponents time to prepare or react. Street fights weren't boxing matches with rules and referees. They were brutal exchanges where hesitation meant defeat and mercy often led to permanent injury. The key was explosive action combined with absolute commitment to whatever course was chosen. "Last chance to walk away, Jake," said quietly, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Clean up your own mess and find someone else to bother." This doesn't have to go any further. Connor stepped closer, forming a triangle with Tyler and Dylan that would prevent Jake from escaping without going through at least one of them. His football experience had taught him the value of positioning and leverage, how to use superior size to control smaller opponents through pure physical dominance. At 6'2" and 220 pounds, he'd bulldozed through countless defensive lines, treating human obstacles as problems to be solved through applied force. "Listen to him," Connor laughed, his voice carrying the particular cruelty of someone who'd never faced genuine consequences for his actions, acting all tough like he's some kind of action movie hero. "This isn't Denver anymore, Martinez. Mountain boys do things different up here." Dylan continued recording, his phone capturing every word and gesture for posterity. The video would require minimal editing to tell the story Tyler wanted circulated. New kid gets aggressive. Local heroes defend themselves. Order restored through justified response. Social media algorithms would push the content to maximum visibility, ensuring Jake's humiliation reached beyond Lincoln Ridge to become permanent digital testimony to his foolishness. Tyler reached out to shove Jake's shoulder, the same casual gesture of dominance he'd used successfully dozens of times before. His hand never made contact. Jake's response came with the speed and precision of a striking snake. He caught Tyler's wrist in mid-motion, his grip locking around the quarterback's arm like a steel trap. Using Tyler's forward momentum against him, Jake pivoted smoothly to his left while pulling Tyler past his original target. The movement was textbook jiu-jitsu, borrowed from Carlos Martinez's military training and refined through countless repetitions at Riverside Community Boxing Gym. Tyler stumbled forward, his balance completely compromised by the unexpected redirection of his energy. Before he could recover, Jake's right hand drove upward in a devastating uppercut that connected with surgical precision beneath Tyler's chin. The punch carried all the power Jake could generate from his legs and core, transferred through perfect technique into a blow that lifted the larger boy off his feet. Tyler's eyes rolled back as his body went limp, consciousness departing instantly. From the perfectly placed strike, he collapsed backward onto the concrete with a sound like a bag of wet cement hitting pavement, his Letterman jacket providing minimal cushioning against the unforgiving surface. Blood began pooling beneath his head where it had struck the ground, though Jake's training told him the injury wasn't life-threatening. Connor reacted with the reflexes of someone accustomed to violent contact, charging forward with the same technique he'd used to flatten opposing quarterbacks throughout his high school career. His approach was direct and overwhelming, designed to use superior mass and speed to drive his target into submission through sheer physical dominance. Jake sidestepped Connor's rush with fluid grace, allowing the linebacker's momentum to carry him past his intended target. As Connor stumbled by, Jake drove his elbow into the larger boy's kidney with enough force to drop a grown man. Connor's legs buckled immediately, his nervous system short-circuiting from the precisely targeted blow. He crashed into the oak tree, with enough impact to shower leaves down around his motionless form. Dylan stood frozen, his phone trembling in hands that suddenly seemed too weak to maintain their grip. The entire sequence had lasted less than 10 seconds, transforming what should have been routine intimidation into something resembling a professional combat demonstration. His mind struggled to process what he'd witnessed. 2 of Lincoln Ridge's most feared students reduced to unconscious heaps by someone they'd dismissed as harmless. "Turn off the camera," Jake said, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity that had preceded the violence. "Delete the video, walk away." Dylan's finger hovered over his phone screen, torn between self-preservation and loyalty to his fallen friends. The smart choice was obvious. Jake had just demonstrated capabilities that went far beyond typical teenage fighting. Whatever training the new kid possessed clearly included techniques designed to incapacitate opponents quickly and efficiently. "I said delete it," Jake repeated, taking a step toward Dylan's position. "This doesn't have to include you." The phone slipped from Dylan's nerveless fingers, clattering onto the concrete with enough force to spider the screen. He raised his hands in surrender, backing away from Jake with the same instinctive fear that prey animals showed when confronting apex predators. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by the sobering realization that he'd just witnessed something beyond his understanding or ability to control. Jake walked to where Tyler lay unconscious, checking the quarterback's pulse and breathing with the methodical precision of someone trained in combat medicine. His father had taught him that winning a fight meant ensuring your opponents lived. To learn from their mistakes, not creating corpses that would bring law enforcement attention. Both Tyler and Connor were breathing normally, their injuries painful but not permanently damaging. Blood pounded in Jake's ears as adrenaline coursed through his system, his body still primed for additional threats that might emerge from the school building or surrounding area. Years of training had prepared him for exactly this scenario, though he'd hoped never to use those skills in a civilian environment. The transition from defensive to offensive mindset felt natural and terrifying in equal measure. Students began emerging from Lincoln Ridge's building, drawn by the commotion and the supernatural silence that had fallen over the courtyard. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to shock as they registered the scene. Tyler Brooks unconscious on concrete, Connor Walsh slumped against the oak tree, Dylan Reed backing away with his hands raised, and Jake Martinez standing calmly. In the center of it all, the first whispered exclamations carried across the courtyard like wildfire spreading through dry grass. Phones appeared with the reflexive speed of a generation raised on social media, camera lenses focusing on the aftermath of violence that would reshape Lincoln Ridge's social landscape forever. Jake's anonymity was officially over, his carefully maintained invisibility shattered by 30 seconds of decisive action. Principal Anderson's voice echoed from the building's intercom system, calling for security and demanding that all students return to their classrooms immediately. But it was too late to contain what had already escaped. The story would spread through Lincoln Ridge faster than administrative damage control could follow, growing and changing with each retelling until fact and fiction became indistinguishable. Jake looked down at his hands, noting the slight tremor that always followed combat situations. His father had warned him about this moment, when peaceful existence would collide with violent necessity and force choices that couldn't be undone. There would be consequences for what had just occurred, ramifications that would extend far beyond high school, social dynamics into realms Jake wasn't prepared to navigate. But as he surveyed the wreckage of Tyler's dominance, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced since his father's death, a sense of control over his own destiny. The shy new kid from Denver was gone, replaced by someone willing to fight for principles that mattered more than convenience or safety. The aftermath unfolded with the relentless momentum of an avalanche. Within minutes of Tyler and Connor hitting the concrete, Lincoln Ridge High School transformed from its usual controlled environment into something resembling a crime scene investigation. Principal Anderson arrived first, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, anger, and barely contained panic as he surveyed the wreckage of what had been the school's most untouchable students. Tyler remained unconscious, his breathing steady but his face already beginning to swell from Jake's precisely delivered uppercut. Connor had regained consciousness but couldn't seem to coordinate his movements properly, sitting against the oak tree with the glazed expression of someone whose nervous system was still rebooting from trauma. Dylan stood 20 feet away, his shattered phone forgotten at his feet, staring at Jake with the wide-eyed terror of someone who'd witnessed forces beyond his comprehension. Emergency medical technicians arrived within 10 minutes, their practiced efficiency suggesting they'd dealt with sports-related injuries before, but nothing quite like this. As they loaded Tyler onto a stretcher, One of the paramedics quietly asked Jake if he'd received any formal combat training. The question carried professional curiosity rather than accusation. The precision of Tyler's injuries spoke to someone who understood human anatomy with surgical clarity. "My father taught me some things," Jake replied, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned to reveal information sparingly. The paramedic nodded with the knowing expression of someone who'd served in military environments. Recognizing the particular efficiency that separated trained fighters from street brawlers. The police arrived as Tyler was being loaded into the ambulance, their presence adding an official gravity that made surrounding students retreat to safer distances. Officer Martinez, a middle-aged veteran whose nameplate made Jake's stomach tighten with unexpected coincidence, approached with the measured steps of someone accustomed to sorting through conflicting versions of violent events. "Son, I need you to tell me exactly what happened here," Officer Martinez said, his voice carrying professional neutrality that didn't quite mask underlying concern. "We've got 2 injured students and a lot of witnesses, but the stories I'm hearing don't match up." Jake recounted the events with factual precision, omitting nothing but presenting the sequence in terms that emphasized self-defense rather than aggressive action. His father's military background had included instruction on dealing with law enforcement, understanding that truthfulness combined with proper presentation could determine whether incidents were classified as justified response or criminal assault. Dylan, when questioned separately, confirmed Jake's version with trembling accuracy. Whatever loyalty he'd felt toward Tyler and Connor had evaporated the moment he'd witnessed their swift and decisive defeat. His description painted Jake as someone who'd tried to de-escalate before resorting to violence, corroborating the self-defense narrative that would prove crucial in determining charges. The crowd of students pressed against classroom windows provided additional testimony through their phone recordings, though most had begun filming only after the violence concluded. What they captured was Jake's calm demeanor in the aftermath, his immediate concern for his opponent's medical condition, and his cooperative attitude with responding authorities. Principal Anderson found himself navigating unprecedented territory. Lincoln Ridge's zero-tolerance violence policy demanded Jake's immediate expulsion, but the clear evidence of self-defense complicated that response. Tyler's family wielded considerable influence within the school district, but their son's actions had been captured on multiple cameras, making it difficult to paint him as an innocent victim. More problematic was the growing social media storm that had erupted around the incident. Multiple students had posted their footage across various platforms, and the videos were spreading through high school networks across Colorado with viral intensity. Comment sections filled with debates about bullying, self-defense, and the particular satisfaction of watching privileged bullies face consequences for their actions. The hashtag LinkedIn Knockout began trending within hours, accompanied by slow-motion justice and New Kid Warrior as users shared and reshared the footage with increasingly dramatic commentary. Jake's identity remained somewhat protected by his recent arrival and limited social media presence, but Tyler and Connor's prominence made them instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with Colorado high school athletics. By evening, the story had escaped local boundaries entirely. News outlets picked up the footage, framing it within broader conversations about bullying prevention and school violence. Jake found himself referenced as both hero and cautionary tale, depending on the political perspective of whoever was commenting on the situation. His mother, Maria Martinez, returned from her hospital shift to find their modest apartment surrounded by news vans and reporters, seeking interviews about her son's background. The attention terrified her in ways that went beyond typical parental concern for a child in trouble. Jake's display of combat skills had revealed capabilities she'd hoped would remain hidden, especially given the circumstances surrounding his father's death. "You promised him you'd keep it quiet," she said as they sat in their kitchen, curtains drawn against the cameras outside. Your father made you swear you'd only use those skills if you had no other choice. Jake met his mother's worried gaze with steady calm that reminded her painfully of Carlos. I didn't have another choice, Mom. They weren't going to stop with humiliation. It would have escalated until someone got seriously hurt anyway. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at their door, firm but not aggressive. Through the peephole, Jake could see a woman in her 40s wearing a simple business suit, standing apart from the cluster of reporters who continued their vigil on the sidewalk. Something about her posture suggested law enforcement, though. She carried no visible identification. Mrs. Martinez, the woman said when Maria opened the door cautiously. My name is Detective Sarah Thompson. I worked with your husband on his final case. We need to talk. The revelation sent ice through Jake's veins. His father's death had been classified as a training accident, but Jake had harbored suspicions that the official story concealed more complex circumstances. Detective Thompson's presence suggested those suspicions might have been justified. Over coffee in their living room, Detective Thompson revealed details that reshaped Jake's understanding of recent events. Carlos Martinez hadn't died in a routine training exercise. He'd been investigating a drug trafficking network that used high school athletic programs as distribution points. His cover had been blown by someone within law enforcement, leading to his assassination disguised as an accident. Your display today has attracted attention from people who thought this investigation died with your father, Detective Thompson explained, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many good officers killed in the line of duty. They're going to want to know how much Carlos taught you, whether you represent a threat to their operations. The implications were staggering. Jake's viral moment hadn't just established his reputation at Lincoln Ridge. It had potentially marked him as a target for the same criminal network that had killed his father. The skills Carlos had taught him for self-defense might now be the only things keeping Jake alive. Detective Thompson offered protection in exchange for Jake's cooperation in continuing his father's investigation. The drug network had expanded since Carlos's death, using high school athletes as unwitting couriers and exploiting family connections to avoid law enforcement scrutiny. Tyler's family construction company had been flagged as a potential money laundering operation, though proving it would require the kind of inside access that Jake's new notoriety might provide. The choice before Jake was stark: accept witness protection and abandon any hope of normal teenage existence, or stay in Millbrook and help finish what his father had started. Either path carried dangers that extended far beyond high school social dynamics into realms where mistakes meant death rather than embarrassment. Jake's decision, when it came, surprised both his mother and Detective Thompson. He would stay at Lincoln Ridge, but not as the invisible new kid he'd tried to be. His father's legacy demanded completion, regardless of personal cost. The shy teenager from Denver was gone forever, replaced by someone willing to fight battles that mattered. The following Monday, Jake returned to Lincoln Ridge as a completely different person. Tyler remained hospitalized with a concussion, while Connor struggled with coordination issues that had ended his football season permanently. Their absence created a power vacuum that shifted the school's entire social ecosystem overnight. Students who'd previously ignored Jake now watched him with mixture of respect and fear. Teachers struggled to reconcile his academic performance with his demonstrated capacity for violence. The administration implemented new security measures while quietly investigating connections between recent events and broader criminal activity. Jake navigated this transformed landscape with the confidence of someone who discovered his true capabilities. He no longer sought invisibility or avoided confrontation. When conflicts arose, they ended quickly and decisively, establishing Jake as someone who commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation. The investigation into his father's death accelerated as Jake provided access to information networks previously beyond law enforcement reach. His unique position as both student and trained operative allowed him to gather intelligence while maintaining cover that protected ongoing operations. By winter break, the drug trafficking network had begun to crumble under pressure from Jake's undercover work and Detective Thompson's coordinated law enforcement response. Tyler's father faced federal charges for money laundering, while several corrupt police officers found themselves under investigation for their roles in Carlos Martinez's death. Jake's transformation was complete, but the cost had been enormous. His chance at normal teenage existence was gone forever, replaced by responsibilities that would follow him long after graduation. He'd inherited his father's war along with his skills, accepting a legacy that demanded constant vigilance against enemies who viewed him as an existential threat. Standing in Lincoln Ridge's courtyard on the anniversary of the lunch incident, Jake reflected on how dramatically his world had changed. The shy new kid who'd hoped to blend in was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned that some battles chose their fighters rather than the reverse. His father's lessons had prepared him for this moment, though Carlos could never have anticipated the specific circumstances that would test those teachings. The mountain air still carried the scent of pine and possibility, but Jake now understood that some possibilities carried prices beyond imagination. He'd chosen to pay those prices, accepting consequences that would reshape not just his own future, but the futures of everyone connected to his father's unfinished work. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.